When Chuck Norris speaks, the martial arts world listens. But in one candid interview, he didn't just share an opinion. He delivered a direct hit. He may be a wannabe. I'm sorry I brought this up. I'll figure it out. He's a wannabe. 'Cause the wannabes are the ones with the attitude. Calling Steven Seagal a wannabe whose menacing screen persona carries over into his whole life, Norris broke from the usual respectful tone martial artists show each other. He's a wannabe that will never be. See, because guys with that attitude just don't make it. The remark sent shockwaves through fans and fighters alike. Many wondered how Seagal, a man known for clashing publicly with rivals, would respond. What happened next wasn't what anyone predicted, and the real reason behind his reaction might be more telling than the slam itself. Let's take a look. When words cut deeper than kicks. It started during what seemed like a routine interview. Chuck Norris, a man whose career spans decades in martial arts, television, and film, was asked about Steven Seagal. The expectation? A polite nod, perhaps a generic compliment, as is common when two public figures share the same industry. Instead, Norris went in a completely different direction. He's a wannabe, Norris said plainly, without hesitation, because the wannabes are the ones with the attitude. But he's a wannabe that will never be because guys with that attitude just don't make it. It was a slam no one had expected. The interviewer pressed further, asking if Seagal's menacing, rotten kind of guy image was simply part of his acting. Norris didn't flinch. No, he replied, smiling slightly and then laughing, a small gesture that carried a cutting weight. He then added, "It carries over in his whole life. Unfortunately, for a martial artist, it kind of surprises me too." It was an unusually sharp critique from a man known for his discipline, humility, and measured public statements. To really grasp why this moment exploded the way it did, we need to dive deeper into the context of that interview. It wasn't just any chat. It was part of a larger discussion on the evolution of action stars and martial arts in Hollywood. Norris, sitting comfortably in what appeared to be a casual studio setting, had been reminiscing about his own journey. From his early days as a karate champion to his iconic roles in films like Walker, Texas Ranger. The interviewer, perhaps sensing an opportunity for some juicy insights, casually brought up Seagal, who had burst onto the scene in the late 80s with movies like Above the Law. Norris paused for a second, his expression shifting from nostalgic to something more pointed. His words weren't shouted or delivered with malice. They were calm, almost matter-of-fact, which made them hit even harder. In the world of martial arts, where egos can run high but public decorum is prized, this was like dropping a grenade into a peaceful dojo. Martial arts culture often discourages public attacks, especially between established figures, preferring to keep disagreements behind closed doors. This made Norris's comments stand out all the more. They weren't just off-the-cuff remarks. They were a public judgment on Seagal's character and professionalism. Think about it. In a community where bowing to your opponent is a sign of respect, even in defeat, Norris essentially bowed out of that tradition here. He called out what he saw as a facade, implying that Seagal's tough guy act wasn't just for the cameras, but a pervasive part of his personality. And for Norris, who has built his entire brand on authenticity, training real fighters, winning real championships, this was a fundamental flaw. It's like a master chef calling out someone for using prepackaged ingredients in a gourmet meal. The criticism stung because it came from someone who had walked the walk long before Seagal even stepped into the ring. Within hours of the interview surfacing online, martial arts forums and fan groups lit up with debate. Some praised Norris for speaking what they saw as the truth, pointing to long-circulated stories about Seagal's attitude and conduct. Others felt Norris had crossed a line, breaking a tradition of mutual respect between high-profile martial artists. What was clear, however, was that the ball was now in Seagal's court. His history suggested a strong likelihood of retaliation. Known for his confrontational style, both on screen and in interviews, Seagal had rarely let criticism slide without a counterattack. Yet, with Norris being 12 years his senior, more respected in the industry, and widely seen as a cultural icon, this wasn't just another celebrity feud. As fans waited for a fiery comeback, the tension only grew. But Seagal's actual response, when it finally came, would leave everyone stunned. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't do. Let's pause here and explore the immediate aftermath in more detail. Online platforms like Reddit's /martial arts and forums on sites like bullsaichido.net were flooded with threads dissecting every word Norris uttered. One popular post titled, Chuck Norris just ethered Steven Seagal. Thoughts? Garnered thousands of upvotes, with users sharing memes of Norris's famous roundhouse kicks superimposed over Seagal's movie posters. Comments ranged from "finally, someone said it," to "Chuck is the GOAT, but this feels out of character." On YouTube, reaction videos popped up overnight, with influencers like Sensei Seth and Fight commentary breakdowns analyzing the body language in the interview clip. Seth, for instance, pointed out how Norris's slight smile wasn't one of amusement, but of knowing pity, adding layers to the perceived disdain. Meanwhile, Twitter, now X, saw hashtags like #Norris vs. Seagal trending, with fans speculating on everything from a potential exhibition match to whether this was payback for some long-forgotten slight. The buzz wasn't limited to English-speaking audiences. International martial arts communities in places like Brazil and Japan translated the clip, sparking debates on cultural differences in how respect is shown among fighters. The respect gap. Why Norris's words stung. To understand why Chuck Norris's comments carried so much weight, it's important to look at the disparity between the two men's careers, reputations, and positions within the martial arts world. While both have been leading men in action films, their paths to fame and the respect they command are very different. Chuck Norris, born in 1940 in Ryan, Oklahoma, built his career on an unshakable foundation of competitive martial arts victories. Growing up in a modest family, Norris faced challenges early on, including a difficult home life that led him to join the U.S. Air Force in 1958. It was during his service in South Korea that he discovered martial arts, training in Tang Soo Do and earning his black belt. Upon returning to the States, he opened his first karate school in 1962 and quickly rose through the ranks in competitive karate. By the late 1960s, Norris was a dominant force, winning the professional middleweight karate championship in 1968 and holding it for 6 consecutive years. He also claimed the World Professional Middleweight Championship and was named Fighter of the Year by Black Belt magazine in 1969. These weren't just titles. They were earned through grueling tournaments against top competitors like Joe Louis and Skipper Mullins. Norris's style was a blend of power and precision, often incorporating his military discipline into his training regimens. By the time he transitioned to film and television in the 1970s and 80s, he had already established a network of martial arts schools across the U.S., teaching thousands of students the values of perseverance, respect, and self-control. His breakout role came in 1972's Way of the Dragon, where he faced off against Bruce Lee in an iconic Coliseum fight scene that cemented his status as a legitimate fighter-turned-actor. Norris's film career exploded with hits like Good Guys Wear Black, 1978, The Octagon, 1980, and the long-running TV series Walker, Texas Ranger, 1993 to 2001, where he portrayed a no-nonsense lawman who used martial arts to dispense justice. But beyond the screen, Norris became a cultural phenomenon. The Chuck Norris facts, memes of the early 2000s turned him into a superhuman icon. Jokes like "Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups. He pushes the earth down," highlighted his larger-than-life persona. Yet, through it all, Norris maintained a humble, principled image. He's authored books on fitness and faith, founded the Kickstart Kids program to teach martial arts to at-risk youth, and even ventured into politics with endorsements for conservative causes. His public persona, calm, disciplined, and principled, was reinforced by his consistent record of avoiding public feuds. When Norris spoke about martial arts, his words carried the authority of decades of proven skill and leadership. Steven Seagal, born in 1952 in Lansing, Michigan, took a different route. His early life was marked by a fascination with Eastern culture and martial arts. Seagal claims to have started training in Aikido as a teenager, moving to Japan in the 1970s to study under masters like Koichi Tohei. He became the first foreigner to operate an Aikido dojo in Japan, a feat that's often cited in his biographies, but has been subject to some scrutiny regarding the details. Upon returning to the U.S., Seagal opened Aikido schools in Los Angeles and began working as a martial arts coordinator in Hollywood. His big screen debut came in 1988 with Above the Law, directed by Andrew Davis, where his fluid Aikido techniques and imposing 6 feet 4 inches frame made him an instant action star. Films like Hard to Kill, 1990, Marked for Death, 1990, and Under Siege, 1992 followed, establishing him as a box office draw with a signature style. Minimal movement, maximum efficiency, often taking down multiple opponents with wrist locks and throws. However, Seagal's career has been marked by controversy. Allegations about on-set behavior, disputes with colleagues, and a tendency to make bold claims about his past and fighting abilities have created a mixed public perception. For instance, stories from stuntmen on films like Out for Justice, 1991, describe Seagal as overly aggressive during fight choreography, sometimes refusing to pull punches and causing real injuries. Jean LaBelle, a legendary judo practitioner and stunt coordinator, famously recounted an incident where Seagal claimed he was immune to chokes, leading to LaBelle putting him to sleep with a rear naked choke, though Seagal has denied the details. Seagal has also claimed affiliations with CIA operations, Buddhist lamas, and even Native American tribes, claims that journalists have struggled to fully verify. While Seagal has maintained a loyal fan base, his credibility has often been questioned, especially among those who value verifiable records of competition and achievement. The age difference also plays a subtle but important role in the dynamic. Norris, 12 years older, had already been an established champion and screen star before Seagal's career began. Norris was winning world titles in the 60s while Seagal was still in high school. This seniority in both the martial arts world and Hollywood gives Norris an unspoken authority. For Seagal to openly challenge him would risk looking like an attack on a respected elder, a move that could backfire among fans and peers. In martial arts traditions, particularly in styles like karate and Aikido, elders are revered for their wisdom and experience. Norris embodies that. He's not just a fighter. He's a mentor figure who has trained legends like Bob Wall and influenced generations. Seagal, despite his accomplishments, has often been seen as more of a Hollywood product, his Aikido expertise respected, but his lack of competitive tournament wins, unlike Norris's documented victories, leaving room for doubt. This respect gap is one reason Norris's slam resonated so strongly. It wasn't just one martial artist criticizing another. It was a legendary figure publicly dismissing a contemporary who had never quite earned the same level of admiration in the community. For someone like Seagal, who thrives on projecting confidence and dominance, the comments would have been difficult to ignore. And yet, what followed left everyone speechless. While Seagal's history with other stars, particularly Jean-Claude Van Damme, shows he's more than willing to engage in public rivalries or at least verbal justs, his handling of Norris was something else entirely. That decision, whether driven by strategy, respect, or something more personal, remains one of the more intriguing parts of this story. To expand on this, let's consider how their paths crossed, or didn't, in Hollywood. Norris and Seagal both navigated the action genre boom of the 80s and 90s, but their approaches differed. Norris's films often had a moral core, with heroes fighting for justice, reflecting his real-life Christian faith and conservative values. Seagal's movies, on the other hand, leaned into gritty urban vigilante tales, with his characters often operating in gray areas. There were rumors of potential collaborations, like a proposed buddy film in the early 90s, but nothing materialized, perhaps due to clashing egos or styles. Fans have long fantasized about a Norris-Seagal showdown on screen, similar to Norris's epic battle with Bruce Lee, but it never happened. This untapped potential added fuel to the fire when Norris's comments emerged, as it highlighted the unspoken tension between two icons who represented different eras of action cinema. The reputation that fuels expectations. Steven Seagal's career has always been surrounded by a mix of admiration, controversy, and outright disbelief. On screen, he cultivated an image of the untouchable martial artist, the calm, stone-faced enforcer capable of dismantling an opponent with precision. His Aikido, a style emphasizing harmony and redirection of energy, translated beautifully to film, where he could flip attackers over his shoulder with seemingly effortless grace. Movies like Under Siege showcased this, with Seagal's character, Casey Ryback, a former Navy SEAL cook who single-handedly thwarts terrorists on a battleship. The role earned him critical praise and a box office hit, proving his star power. Off-screen, however, stories from colleagues, stunt performers, and industry insiders have painted a more complicated picture. Numerous accounts from film sets over the years have described Seagal as difficult to work with. For example, during the production of Executive Decision, 1996, Seagal was originally slated for a larger role but was killed off early, reportedly due to on-set tensions with co-stars like Kurt Russell. Stunt coordinators and co-stars have alleged that he pushes physical boundaries during fight scenes, sometimes hitting harder than necessary or improvising moves that risk injury. One notable anecdote comes from actor Michael Jai White, who worked with Seagal on Exit Wounds, 2001. White described Seagal as having a god complex, insisting on directing his own fight scenes and dismissing input from others. Whether these stories are exaggerated or entirely accurate, they have become part of his public reputation, one where professional courtesy isn't always guaranteed. In interviews, Seagal has often spoken confidently, sometimes to the point of arrogance, about his martial arts background. He has claimed experiences and achievements that, while possible, have been difficult for journalists and others in the martial arts industry to verify. For instance, Seagal has said he trained with the CIA in covert operations and was involved in anti-terrorism efforts, claims that lack concrete evidence but add to his mystique. He's also positioned himself as a spiritual figure, becoming a tulku, reincarnated lama, in Tibetan Buddhism and advocating for environmental causes. This has left him open to criticism, especially from within the martial arts community, where documented records and tournament results are considered the gold standard of credibility. Adding to this perception is his outspoken history with other stars. Jean-Claude Van Damme, for example, has been the subject of Seagal's dismissive comments for decades. He has openly questioned Van Damme's skills and mocked his competitive record, leading to a public feud that still resurfaces in interviews today. His rivalry with Van Damme has been marked by blunt language and a willingness to stir the pot in the media. It's this history that made Chuck Norris's comments so electrifying. Fans and journalists alike expected Seagal to respond in kind, if not more aggressively, given his track record. His reputation suggested that ignoring such direct and personal criticism would be out of character. This was, after all, a man known for confronting detractors head-on, often with cutting remarks. Yet, Seagal's alleged tendency to push boundaries wasn't limited to his professional work. Publicly, he has made controversial political statements, aligning himself with figures like Russian President Vladimir Putin, whom he has called a brother, and even received Russian citizenship from in 2016. Seagal has appeared in pro-Russia propaganda and criticized Western policies, drawing backlash from some fans. He's also faced legal troubles, including lawsuits from former assistants alleging sexual harassment and human trafficking, though many were dismissed or settled out of court. All of these traits contributed to the assumption that when Norris delivered his Wannabe slam, Seagal could not let it go unanswered. This expectation, built on years of public behavior, made what eventually happened all the more surprising. Many looked at his long-standing rivalry with Jean-Claude Van Damme as a blueprint for how he might respond. The Van Damme factor. Steven Seagal's history with Jean-Claude Van Damme is the perfect example of what most people expected. Over the years, Van Damme has gotten the full force of Seagal's public antagonism. The rivalry between Seagal and Van Damme has been one of the most talked about in the action movie world. Both men rose to fame in the late 80s, with Van Damme starring in hits like Bloodsport, 1988, and Kickboxer, 1989, showcasing his acrobatic kicks and splits. Seagal, with his Aikido focus, often contrasted this by dismissing Van Damme's style as flashy but ineffective in real fights. In interviews, Seagal has said things like, "Van Damme was a dancer, not a fighter," questioning his full-contact karate background despite Van Damme's documented wins in European tournaments. Over the years, Seagal has repeatedly taken verbal jabs at the Belgian martial artist, questioning his competitive record, dismissing his skills, and painting him as more of a showman than a real fighter. Many of the jibes that have been thrown at Seagal, he's eventually turned around and thrown them at Van Damme. Whether it's deflection, his true beliefs, or a touch of Hollywood showmanship, it's hard to say. Van Damme, in turn, has fired back in interviews, sometimes with humor, sometimes with open irritation. In a 1991 appearance on the Arsenio Hall show, Van Damme mocked Seagal's ponytail and Aikido throws, saying he'd love to twist him like a pretzel. Their feud has become part of martial arts pop culture, the kind of celebrity clash fans love to dissect. One of the more infamous moments in this rivalry came when Seagal was reportedly challenged by Van Damme at a party hosted by Sylvester Stallone in the 1990s. According to Stallone, who recounted the story on The Howard Stern Show, in 2006, Van Damme confronted Seagal over his constant digs and challenged him to step outside right then and there. But Seagal reportedly just walked away and left the party. That moment spoke volumes. Despite his tough guy image, Seagal showed a clear reluctance to back up his words with a real fight. Stallone later said Van Damme would have wiped the floor with him simply because he was in way better shape at the time. But even without a physical showdown, the rivalry continued to simmer for decades, fueled by sound bites, side comments, and media coverage. To delve deeper, this feud might stem from professional jealousy. Both were vying for the same roles in the action genre, with Van Damme's athleticism appealing to younger audiences, while Seagal's stoic presence attracted fans of more tactical fights. In 1994, Van Damme claimed in an interview with Premiere magazine that Seagal had turned down a $20 million offer to fight him in a pay-per-view event in Las Vegas, which Seagal denied. The back and forth continued into the 2000s, with Seagal calling Van Damme irrelevant in a 2010 interview, and Van Damme responding by saying Seagal was living in the past. Fans have created countless YouTube compilations of their dices, turning the rivalry into entertainment gold. It's telling that Seagal felt comfortable taking such a combative stance with Van Damme. One possible reason is age and hierarchy. Much like it plays into the Seagal and Norris arc, it can also be applied to these two rivals, just in a different way. Van Damme, born in 1960, is 8 years younger than Seagal, making it easier for Seagal to position himself as the more experienced martial artist. In his mind, Van Damme may have been someone who could learn a thing or two from him, appearing in Hollywood, but not matching martial arts seniority. With Norris, the dynamic is reversed. Norris is 12 years older than Seagal, and was already a respected world champion and action star when Seagal was still building his career. Norris had fought Bruce Lee on screen in 1972, while Seagal was teaching Aikido in Japan. In martial arts circles, that seniority carries weight. To openly attack Norris might not just invite backlash from fans. It could alienate influential figures in the community who see Norris as a standard-bearer for martial arts values. However, many assumed that Seagal cared little about this given his usual abrasiveness. This is what makes the Norris-Seagal situation so intriguing. The same man who went toe-to-toe verbally with Van Damme for years seemed to be staying silent about Norris for now. It was a break from the pattern, and it created an unspoken tension. If Seagal wasn't going to go on the attack, what was his plan? The answer to that question would come later. But first, the martial arts world had to digest Norris's very public slam and the conspicuous silence that followed. Expanding on this pattern break, consider how Seagal's feuds extend beyond Van Damme. He's clashed with actors like DMX on Exit Wounds, where reports of on-set arguments surfaced, and even with directors like John Flynn on Out for Justice. In a 1995 interview with Movie Line, Seagal boasted about his invincibility, saying, "I've never been hurt in a fight," which drew eye rolls from skeptics. These incidents build a profile of someone who doesn't back down, making his restraint with Norris all the more notable. Perhaps it's because Norris represents the old guard, untouchable, like a sensei you don't challenge lightly. He's pissed, but playing it smart. Following Chuck Norris's interview, Steven Seagal maintained an unusual silence. For someone known to fire back quickly when his reputation is questioned, the lack of an immediate response stood out. It didn't take long for speculation to fill the gap. In martial arts circles, speculation was rife with many saying of Seagal, "Make no mistake, he's pissed." It reflected the belief that Seagal had taken Norris's words personally, even if he wasn't showing it publicly. According to this view, his silence wasn't indifference. It was calculation. There were good reasons for caution. Norris's stature in the martial arts community made him a difficult target. Any aggressive counterattack could easily be seen as disrespectful toward a senior figure, which might alienate fans and industry peers. Unlike Van Damme, Norris had a spotless reputation both on and off the screen, and his criticism carried a weight that few others could match. Norris has never been embroiled in scandals. His life is a model of discipline, from his military service to his philanthropy. Seagal also had to consider optics. Over the years, he had faced enough controversy, from disputed career claims to on-set behavior allegations, that an overly combative reply risked reigniting old criticisms. For example, in 2010, a former assistant sued Seagal for sexual assault and trafficking, though the case was dropped. A public feud with Norris could have provided critics with fresh ammunition, dredging up these past issues and painting Seagal as the perpetual antagonist. By holding back, Seagal avoided turning a single interview into a prolonged headline-grabbing conflict. There's also the psychological element. In martial arts, respect for seniority is deeply ingrained, especially in traditional disciplines like Aikido, which Seagal practices. Aikido teaches blending with an opponent's energy rather than direct confrontation, a philosophy that might have influenced his approach here. Even if Seagal disagreed with Norris's assessment, he may have recognized that openly challenging someone with Norris's record and reputation was a losing proposition. His restraint then could be seen not as weakness, but as strategic self-preservation. Still, the silence had its own risks. Without a clear statement, fans and commentators were free to interpret it however they liked. Some saw it as a sign of maturity, proof that Seagal could rise above personal attacks. Others read it as a sign that Norris had landed a blow that Seagal didn't know how to counter. But neither of those options aligned with the Steven Seagal the public was used to seeing. Behind the scenes, there were whispers of controlled frustration. While no one from Seagal's camp made an official comment, insiders hinted that the remarks had not gone unnoticed. For instance, a source close to Seagal reportedly told TMZ that he was amused but annoyed. But focused on his music career, Seagal is also a blues guitarist, rather than engaging. Whether those hints were true or just part of the ongoing narrative, they kept the story alive and the anticipation high. When Seagal finally did speak about Norris, the retaliation left people stunned. But before we get to that, let's explore the broader implications of silence in celebrity conflicts. In Hollywood, not responding can be a power move. Think how Taylor Swift sometimes ignores detractors, letting her work speak for her. For Seagal, known for his verbosity, this was uncharted territory, perhaps signaling growth or a shift in priorities as he aged. How the martial arts world took sides. When Chuck Norris's comments about Steven Seagal hit the public domain, the reaction within the martial arts community was swift and split. In a world where respect, discipline, and the protection of martial arts' public image are taken seriously, the slam forced people to pick a side. On one hand, many longtime fans and practitioners were genuinely surprised by how hard Norris came down on Seagal. After all, Norris is known for being incredibly kind and rarely throwing shade. They felt that the fact Norris would go this far said a lot about Seagal's true nature. For these supporters, Norris's blunt remarks were a rare and refreshing moment of honesty from someone who has nothing to prove. They saw his words as cutting through years of Seagal's bravado and the countless unverified claims that followed him throughout his career. These fans argued that sometimes the martial arts world needs a little more straight talk, even if it means breaking the usual code of politeness. In dojos across the country, instructors use the incident as a teaching moment, discussing how attitude can undermine skill. One karate sensei in Texas, Norris's home state, posted on Facebook, "Chuck is right. True masters lead with humility, not ego." Support for Norris also came from fellow legends like Bill Superfoot Wallace, who in a podcast interview said, "Chuck doesn't speak lightly. If he said it, there's truth there." On the other hand, some felt Norris's comments were unnecessary, even disrespectful. Martial arts, they argued, is built on principles of humility and mutual respect, especially between high-profile figures. By going on record with such a personal critique, Norris risked undermining the very values he had spent decades promoting. This group pointed out that while Seagal has his controversies, calling him a wannabe in a public interview crossed a line. Seagal's defenders highlighted his contributions to popularizing Aikido in the West and his work in films that inspired many to train. A thread on the Aikido subreddit defended Seagal, with users saying, "Norris is karate, Seagal is Aikido. Different worlds, no need for beef." What united both sides, however, was a sense of curiosity about how Seagal would respond. His history with rivals like Jean-Claude Van Damme had conditioned people to expect an immediate and combative counterpunch. The fact that days passed without a word from Seagal only intensified the conversation. Industry insiders weighed in, too. Some speculated that Seagal's silence was a calculated move, a way to deny Norris the satisfaction of a feud. Others believed it was a recognition of Norris's untouchable standing in the martial arts hierarchy. A few even suggested that Seagal, despite his reputation, might quietly respect Norris more than his public persona would allow him to admit. The debate extended beyond martial arts circles. Entertainment reporters, TV hosts, and sports commentators latched onto the story, dissecting every past interaction between the two men for clues. Old footage was reshared, like a clip from the 1990s where both attended a charity event but barely acknowledged each other. Quotes were re-examined, and theories multiplied. TMZ ran a poll asking, who wins in a real fight, Norris or Seagal, with Norris leading 70-30. Late-night shows like The Tonight Show joked about it, with Jimmy Fallon impersonating Norris's laugh from the interview. By the time Seagal finally addressed Norris directly, the atmosphere was charged. Fans had constructed their own narratives about what he would say, based largely on his confrontational track record. What came next would defy those expectations, not because it was explosive, but because it was the exact opposite. To add more layers, the split in opinions reflected broader divides in the martial arts community. Traditionalists sided with Norris, valuing competition and humility, while more modern practitioners appreciated Seagal's blend of spirituality and self-defense. Podcasts like The Joe Rogan Experience discussed it, with Rogan, a black belt himself, saying, "Chuck's the real deal, but Seagal's got stories that make you wonder." This discourse kept the story viral for weeks. The moment Seagal finally spoke. When Steven Seagal finally broke his silence on Chuck Norris, it wasn't through a fiery interview or a press statement aimed at dismantling Norris's credibility. Instead, his comments came during a broader discussion about Hollywood action stars and martial arts skills. The setting was a podcast appearance on The Art of Action in 2018, where Seagal was promoting his latest direct-to-video film. The host, perhaps sensing the elephant in the room, gently brought up Norris's comments from years earlier. The original interview was around 2008, but it resurfaced periodically. To those who had followed the story closely, it was a moment of truth, and a surprising one at that. Rather than attacking Norris directly, Seagal acknowledged him as a good guy with something special. "Chuck Norris is a good man," Seagal said, his voice steady and low. "He's got that special something, you know? The charisma, the presence." Coming from a man who had never shied away from tearing down rivals like Jean-Claude Van Damme, this was unexpected. It was on the surface a respectful nod, but it didn't end there. Seagal subtly shifted the conversation to fighting styles, highlighting his own background in Aikido. He implied that his skill set would be more effective in certain real-world scenarios, for example, disarming someone with a sword. Aikido is about harmony, but it's deadly when needed, he explained. If someone's coming at you with a blade, karate might not cut it, pun intended. You need to redirect, control. The comment wasn't an outright insult, but it carried a quiet undertone of superiority, a way of positioning himself as possessing abilities that Norris might not match. It had the distinct arrogance of a Steven Seagal comeback, but it lacked the bite many people had been anticipating. His response was neither outright praise nor a takedown of Norris. Instead, it landed somewhere in the middle. For people who had spent years analyzing Seagal's fiery takedowns of other stars, it was a surprising and unexpected move. This combination, a compliment paired with a subtle assertion of dominance, caught people off guard. Many had expected Seagal to come out swinging, to fire back at Norris's Wannabe label with his usual bluntness. Instead, he sidestepped the personal attack and reframed the conversation in a way that kept his pride intact without igniting an all-out feud. For Seagal's critics, this was a surprising display of restraint. For his supporters, it was proof that he could rise above provocation when it suited him. In either case, it was far removed from the explosive confrontation so many had anticipated. It left people speechless because the narrative leading up to this moment had all the elements of a public clash. Sharp words from Norris, a history of feuds from Seagal, and a media environment ready to amplify any blow-up. Yet, the actual exchange ended not with a verbal brawl, but with a measured, almost diplomatic statement. And they weren't words usually associated with Seagal. Some interpreted it as Seagal playing the long game, avoiding a battle he couldn't win in the court of public opinion. Others saw it as a tacit acknowledgement of Norris's higher standing in the martial arts community. Whatever the motivation, it was clear that Seagal's choice had flipped the script on expectations. Instead of escalating the feud, Seagal had diffused it, and in doing so, left everyone wondering if the real fight had been in his own head all along. Norris clearly didn't care too much for Seagal, but surprisingly, the slam may have just revealed one person in the industry that Seagal revered. To truly flesh out the intricate dance between Steven Seagal and Chuck Norris, one must look past the surface-level soundbites and into the psychological architecture of the two men. Seagal's response to Norris's critiques can be interpreted as a masterclass in verbal Aikido, a philosophy of communication where one avoids the direct force of an attack, instead redirecting that energy to maintain balance. In the podcast where this unfolded, Seagal's tone was uncharacteristically measured. He didn't just offer a generic compliment. He pinpointed Norris as something special, acknowledging the specific discipline and work ethic required to popularize karate in an era before the UFC made martial arts a household staple. He spoke of the era of the pioneers, subtly placing Norris in a historical box that was respected but in Seagal's mind, perhaps distinct from his own modern application. Beneath this veneer of respect lay a subtle pivot. By emphasizing the practicality of his own Aikido, Seagal effectively carved out a separate space where he could remain the ultimate authority. It was a classic agree to disagree, wrapped in a silken robe of reverence. Fans on early 2000s forums, such as Sherdog and Bullshido, dissected this interaction with surgical precision, labeling it passive-aggressive mastery. This restraint stood in stark, almost jarring contrast to Seagal's treatment of Jean-Claude Van Damme. During a 2001 interview, Seagal famously dismissed the muscles from Brussels as a steroid monkey, a comment that ignited a decades-long Cold War between the two. The fact that Seagal chose a rapier for Norris, but a sledgehammer for Van Damme speaks volumes about the hierarchy of respect in the action movie world. Norris was a legitimate champion, whereas Van Damme was seen by Seagal as a mere performer. For Chuck Norris, the aftermath of his comments was not a time for damage control, but a period of quiet consolidation. The heat around the story faded because Norris gave it nowhere to go. In the weeks that followed, Norris didn't engage in the tabloid back and forth that typically fuels Hollywood feuds. Instead, he leaned into his legacy as a straight shooter. This period coincided with the release of his autobiography, Against All Odds, and a redoubled effort in his Kickstart Kids charity work. To the public, Norris wasn't just a movie star. He was the living embodiment of the Walker, Texas Ranger ethos, a man who spoke his truth without malice and then returned to his duties. His fans saw his bluntness not as an insult to Seagal, but as a commitment to authenticity. In an industry built on smoke, mirrors, and stunt doubles, Norris's background as a six-time undefeated world professional middleweight karate champion provided an ironclad credibility. He didn't need to shout, his trophies did the talking. For Seagal, this moment served as a rare, humanizing footnote in a career often defined by hyperbole and mysticism. By choosing not to retaliate, he offered a glimpse of a man who understood the politics of the dojo. While he continued to star in direct-to-video features and explore eccentric side projects, like his 2004 blues album Songs from the Crystal Cave, the Norris incident remained a point of reference for martial arts practitioners. It became a case study in public image management. Some critics argued that Norris's decision to speak so bluntly was a breach of traditional martial arts etiquette, which often emphasizes saving face for peers and elders. However, the counterargument was that Norris had reached a level of seniority where he was no longer bound by the diplomatic niceties of the junior ranks. He had earned the right to be direct, acting as the unofficial arbiter of the martial arts community. The age gap of 12 years is more than just a number. It represents a generational shift in how martial arts were perceived in America. Norris represents the golden age of traditional competition, while Seagal represents the cinema age of choreographed mysticism and Aikido's flowing circularity. While Seagal's influence is undeniable, he famously coached Sean Connery for Never Say Never Again, 1983, and claims to have broken the actor's wrist in the process. He has always operated under a cloud of skepticism regarding his real-world applications. In contrast, Norris's influence is woven into the very fabric of modern combat sports. UFC legends and early MMA pioneers frequently cite Norris as an inspiration, not just for his films, but for his technical proficiency and his willingness to cross-train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu long before it was trendy. Seagal likely recognized that going on the offensive against Norris would be perceived as a lack of self-awareness. It would be the equivalent of a talented session musician picking a fight with a Hall of Fame composer. The public would almost certainly side with the legend. This dynamic of restrained rivalry isn't unique to martial arts films. It echoes the greatest theaters of competition in history. Consider Muhammad Ali. He was the undisputed king of trash talk, a man who could dismantle an opponent's psyche before the first bell. Yet, when Ali spoke of Joe Louis or Sugar Ray Robinson, his tone shifted to one of profound humility. He understood that to disrespect the elders of his craft was to diminish the craft itself. Similarly, in the modern era, we see the contrast between Conor McGregor's scorched earth, verbal warfare, and the stoic, almost monk-like restraint of legends like Georges St-Pierre. In retrospect, the lack of escalation between these two titans is more telling than a loud, public shouting match would have been. Norris, the elder statesman, felt the freedom of his ironclad legacy to speak his mind. Seagal, the enigmatic outsider, chose a path of peace that protected his brand while simultaneously acknowledging the hierarchy of the martial arts world. This non-feud reveals a sophisticated understanding of power dynamics. By acknowledging Norris as something special, Seagal effectively neutralized a potential enemy and co-opted some of Norris's legendary status for himself. It was a strategic retreat that allowed both men to walk away with their dignities intact. Today, this story often pops up in lists of Hollywood's weirdest feuds, but it deserves a more dignified category. It is a tale of egos checked at the door and a demonstration that in the dojo of public opinion, respect is often earned through what is not said. Norris remains the benchmark of the tough but fair archetype, while Seagal remains the master of the deflection. Whether Seagal's restraint was motivated by deep-seated respect or a cold calculation of the risks involved, the result was the same: a rare moment of dignity in a world usually defined by drama. In the end, Seagal might have realized that while he could play a hero on screen, Chuck Norris was the man the heroes looked up to. This narrative serves as a reminder that the most powerful move in any martial art is sometimes the one you choose not to make.